haven't used all this stuff for so long, I kind of forget what order we go in. Oh, jeez. I believe the call to worship is next. Yes, so the call to worship is next. So if you will, please join me in the call to worship. Listen, can you hear the wind?
Come, Holy Spirit, come.
Look, can you see the dancing flames?
Come, Holy Spirit, come.
Do you see the visions?
Come, Holy Spirit, come.
Come, let Pentecost become real in our lives this morning. Come and worship our God who sends the Spirit to touch us and transform us into Pentecostal people. If you will, please join me in singing hymn 97. Standing. Ah, whoops. Yikes. When the Lord comes, he will bring to light things now hidden in darkness, and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Therefore, in the light of Christ, let us confess our sins together. O God, giver of the Spirit, open our ears to hear the amazing story of Pentecost this morning. We've heard it so many times before. It is so familiar. We've ceased to be amazed, surprised, or filled with excitement. Forgive us for our complacency. Blow us out of our complacency. Let the flames of passion dance in our lives. Inspire us with visions and dreams. Help us appreciate each gift you give us. And help us to be truly Pentecostal people.
promised to send us the Spirit that we might fully know God's promise to the world and in our lives. Know that the Spirit of forgiveness and understanding flows over us this day and always. Amen. So obviously, because of everything that was going on during this time, we made some adjustments to try to keep things as normal as possible. And one of them was we had started doing a Bible study on Zoom on Thursday nights, and it actually turned out pretty cool. I've actually really enjoyed doing that, and we're going to keep doing that, even though we're back together now, because I think it's fun and it's nice that you can wear your pajamas and do Bible study. So if that's something you guys are interested in, just shoot me a message, text, or email, or whatever, Facebook, and I'll get you guys set up and going on Thursday, and you guys can join us at 7 p.m. Yes. All you have to do is download Zoom, and then the rest is easy peasy. Are there any joys or concerns you would like to bring before the Lord in front of your brothers and sisters in prayer this morning?
My neighbor, her name is Sis Anderson. She had a very bad stroke, and they sent her a life flight her to Pittsburgh. It doesn't look good, but I know God's able to touch her. And very special spoken.
Edward Rose would like you to pray for her mail lady Lucy. She had her surgery. She's doing better, but she would like to have a prayer. And also she said her friend Ed Reiser had passed away. And we have him in our prayers. Let's make a couple. First, of course, the living issue, living situation is difficult sometimes, so just prayers for more even keel. And I quit smoking, and it's been 4 days, and lots of prayers because that was my go-to when the stress got really high. So
That's awesome.
I'm struggling, so if we could have prayers, would be greatly appreciated.
Definitely. Either way, that is really awesome, and I think a lot of people are really proud to do something so tough.
Yes, I'm feeling very weak.
Herb? We'll go Herb first.
I'm just thankful the stores all have toilet paper again.
Yeah. It could have been a crappy situation. John?
Well, joy and concern for my mom and dad is, most of you probably know, they moved into Southminster 5 days before the shutdown. So it has been very good for my mom and my dad too. He is really feeling a lot physically. The dialysis is very much catching up to him. But now they're even with all the restrictions and not being able to see us. And just last night they put new restrictions on my dad because of him going to dialysis. So my mom is very upset. So they definitely need our prayers for everyone that's in a nursing home. For Seal, especially I have a friend at work I've known for a long time, Rick Mock. He's from Alabama City College, but his mom has Alzheimer's, and she's in her 90s, but he would eat breakfast with her every morning, and he's so afraid that she's going to die and think that he abandoned her. So there's thousands of stories like that. So I bet the people in the nursing home, their families really pray for them.
Still pray for Bobby and Bill with everything going on. I haven't been able to see them. And Herb, you're doing a great job on the flowers out front. They are beautiful.
Thank you.
And nice job. And I know she puts
That's got to be a big job because we actually broke the rules and have been coming down and throwing darts like once a week. And there was a lot of mulch that Herb put out there, so that was really a lot of work. So thank you, Herb.
Yeah.
You did a lot of work. Okay.
I have a few joys. My parents got to see the kids on Friday, which was just amazing because they haven't seen them since March 12th, I think it was. And so it was through plexiglass, which was not ideal, but it was just a really big joy. But my mom was having so much trouble with depression and not being able to see us. So if you could really just specifically pray that this opens up or that she gets some calming in that because she was so upset last night. It was hard. And I don't know if anybody's on Facebook, but I've been complaining at nauseam about teaching my children the homeschooling, and the year is over. And if you could just say prayers that they go back to real school in the fall. Jay talked to me one day, Mom, I really don't like you being my teacher. And I said, well, I love being your mom, but I do not like being your teacher. So if we could just say a prayer that all goes back to normal. And same for Julia, she still has another week left, but she has 2 kids that are little that she's really helping, and I know she's having a lot of trouble, and she still has another week. And just prayers as we go through the summer, that we stay safe. The kids are, it's different. And I'd say in general, they're doing really well with it. It's probably the older kids that are having more difficulty with the lack of seeing their friends and so forth. But just very grateful to God that everything's going as well as it is. None of us have gotten sick, and we've had some really close calls.
So if you are a friend of mine on Facebook, and there's been a lot of controversy going on between how the governor handled this and handled that, and I may have posted something back to the governor that you could have easily been offended by, and I do apologize if anybody had viewed it and took it in the wrong manner, but I erased it and so once again I apologize if you're a friend and my actions were unbecoming as an officer of this church, and I should have never done it, and I do apologize.
I assure you that you are 1,000% forgiven. We're so happy to see you. And that's, I have, I guess, a joy and a concern as well. Just the given that this has been really hard on a lot of people, and especially now with trying to figure out where to go from here. It's easy to be separated and divided on these things, and it's super easy to get frustrated and to speak out of anger. So it's a joy that we've gotten this far, and we're kind of going over the hill here, and it seems like good things are coming. And then prayers too, obviously, for all the things going on in the country, all the riots, just for discernment, I guess, to see where Jesus is leading us, where we can be more faithful. And even if that is something that's uncomfortable and something we don't necessarily like, that we can be faithful in following Jesus wherever he leads. Nancy?
We all are aware that there were the riots last night or yesterday afternoon in Pittsburgh. Well, today at 3 o'clock, they're supposedly going to have a demonstration in Greensburg, and my daughter lives up near there, and my son is visiting somebody's house, and I said to her, make sure he's home by 2:30. And a friend of ours just opened up a business a week before they shut her down in Greensburg, and she's in an alley, and she's all windows, so let's just pray that her shop doesn't get hit. And my daughter said she looked somewhere where there is I can't remember the name of it, somebody can maybe tell me. There's a group that's going around that's stirring this up.
Right.
And they were told that they are definitely going to be in Greensburg.
I heard we
So
were
that's terrible.
It is awful.
And because Greensburg does have an up-and-coming area where they are having little shops and they could just be demolished.
It's also at 7 o'clock in the morning.
7 o'clock. Yeah, so guys, I mean,
Lloyd's daughter and family live down there, so we're trying to get her to visit Because we have all the room in the inn.
Obviously, it seems like things are far away, and this is for people watching later too. Just please be safe. It's crazy how quickly things get closer and closer, so whatever you're doing, just please be safe. John?
Yeah, I think in what she said about small businesses, I mean, even with me, with the people I deal with that have been open, it's very difficult. And I don't know that with everything that restrictions have been put on, I think you're going to see a lot of restaurants, salons. These people, some of these people work on their own, and that's their living, and they have not been able to make a living. And I think just pray for anyone that owns a small business, that they make it through this, and still have their livelihood.
Anything, kid?
Johnny's really happy to be here.
All those little noises are such a blessing. Oh my gosh, that is so sweet.
The day Johnny was born was the day this all started and everything closed. The day he was born, so this is all he knows. So he's happy to be here to see everybody.
Through all this, we've never missed a day of work, but we are very, very short-staffed. So we're working 10-hour days, and there's really no end in sight. We have no one in line to hire, so we all have vacation time that we don't think we're going to be allowed to use. No time off. So that just really kind of stinks, because now's the time when you think maybe we're going to get a breather and somebody get a few days here or there, and it just doesn't really look like it. So just prayers for that.
Prayers for all the healthcare workers, because they're putting such restrictions on us as far as vacations and stuff. And if they let somebody go, somebody has to stay in quarantine for 4 days. It's not like we have extra employees to cover for them. So just for all the healthcare workers, because they're struggling.
I have one extra. Sandy Pandy is going back to work tomorrow, and she works at the daycare center, so she's going to be dealing with a lot of kids and so forth, so it's going to be hard. She's rather scared, as a matter of fact, but I would be too, because it's all new.
And one more. My friend at work, her son Jay, it's kind of going down the wrong path, and I think things have gotten turned around, but just prayers for Jay. God knows his name and knows who he is, but you're young and you think you know everything. It's really scary out there, so for Jay and all of our youth, that just they make the right decisions.
Well, if that is it this morning, it feels weird saying that. Oh my gosh. Also, it's crazy that Herb and Cheryl were the only ones wearing red. I completely forgot. It's crazy.
Why didn't
Your wife's wearing red.
That's like a salmon.
That's enough. So I did the full.
Yeah.
I think that was
I was gonna change, and then I ran out the door, and the kids were there, and I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to change my shirt. And then I thought, nah, they're kind of the door.
Let's listen to the words of the psalmist to prepare our hearts for prayer. Ascribe to the Lord, O mighty ones. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf, Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the Lord shakes the desert. The Lord shakes the desert of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord is enthroned as king forever. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. Let's pray. God, we're thankful this morning that when times were at their darkest and it seemed like this might be something that we may never come out of, that we might never recover from, when we saw people losing their businesses that they had worked hard for, people out of work and struggling to make ends meet, God, we give you thanks this morning that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. And that we can be here this morning and be reminded of that. And God, we thank you that even though we could still do things while we were apart, we could record sermons and things like that, and we have those kind of technological advances, nothing beats this, Lord. So we thank you this morning that your people can gather here and worship you this morning. So God, we ask that you hear these special prayer concerns of your people today. God, we ask that you continue to be with your loved ones who are dealing with diseases and strokes and surgeries and things like that. We ask that you be with Sis as she is trying to recover from this stroke in the hospital. God, even though things are seeming tough and her diagnosis is not great, we know that you are God. So you ask that you be with her. And if it be your will, God, heal her from this and help her recover. We ask that you be with Lucy as she goes for surgery. We ask that you be with John and Carolyn and Seal and all of our loved ones who are in long-term care facilities and nursing homes as they are separated from people they love and they're dealing with loneliness and depression, God. Build up the spirits of those people. Allow them to feel part of this community that they are a part of, even though they have these restrictions and these guidelines, God. God, be with your people today. We also ask that you be with Karen as she tries to quit smoking and she is trying to deal with stress on her own without it. God, be with her this week. Remind her that she is not alone, that she has all of the strength needed to do this thing. Encourage her and keep her spirits high as she fights this urge to go back to what she's known. And God, we also ask that you be with Bobby and Bill. Continue to heal Bill and guide their family and just help them with all the things going on in their life right now. We also ask that you be with all of our healthcare workers, for Karen and Candy and Sandy and all those people who are still working and going back this week, God. Keep them safe. Keep the people that they work around safe. And help them to find time to relax and to spend time with their family. God, we also give you thanks this week for the work that all of the people in this church have done. From the very little things that have kept us running during all of this to such huge works and time-consuming things like Herb and working out in the mulch and things like that. God, we thank you for having inspired these people to be such faithful servants of you. And God, we ask that you continue to do that and call us into even more situations where we can glorify you. God, we thank you that the school year is ended for these homeschooling parents. We thank you for giving them the strength to get through it, and we ask that you be with them this summer as times will continue to be difficult and parenting with lots of children at home and things like that will be hard. God, we also ask that you be with the Reiser family as they are suffering and hurting from the loss of Ed. God, comfort them and love them this week. Be with all the people that have known him, his neighbors, his friends, God. Build up their faith and remind them of our reality because of your resurrection. And God, we also ask that as your church, and we are reminded on Pentecost of our connection to your church, that you help us discern what to do next. That in this situation that is scary and where we are torn between what is right and what is wrong and how we walk that fine line, God, show us what is right, show us the way to go, and help us move our feet forward to what is right. Please keep all of your people safe. Keep our cities safe, our businesses safe, and help us to promote justice in our country. And lastly, God, knowing that there are a lot of things still going on in our families, especially now that we are transitioning to what is going to be the new normal for a while, we ask that you be with all those who are dealing with these inside or unspoken prayer concerns this morning. God, intercede on behalf of your people. Deliver them, free them from things that are holding them back. Forgive them from the guilt that they have held onto for so long. And remind your people just how much they are loved today. And God, in knowing that you do teach us to pray, we pray now in the way that your Son taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and power, and the glory forever. Amen. It's going to look really weird, whoever watches this video, or if you guys go back and watch it, because like when I pray, I move around some, and I'm like tripping over my feet the whole time, so I don't know. That's going to be weird. So as Cheryl mentioned, we will not have our normal offering. We have the collection plates back there if God is leading you to do that. So this morning we will jump directly into the doxology.
Praise from the Son and Holy
I was struggling with that, and I thought if we could have just had one more verse to that song, I think I could have gotten it. But there's only two, so it makes it hard. Being that today is a celebration in our church calendar, there are 4 readings instead of 3, and the first brings us to the book of Numbers in chapter 11. So Moses went out and told the people what the Lord had said. He brought together 70 of their elders and had them stand around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and he took of the Spirit that was on him and put the Spirit on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but they did not do so again. However, 2 men, whose names were Eldad and Medad, had remained in the camp. They were listed among the elders, but did not go out to the tent. Yet the Spirit also rested on them, and they prophesied in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua, son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide since youth, spoke up and said, Moses, my Lord, stop them. But Moses replied, Are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. Then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. Our second reading brings us to the 12th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Therefore I tell you that no one who is speaking by the Spirit of God says, Jesus be cursed, and no one can say, Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but the same God works of them in all men. Now to each one of these manifestations of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit the message of wisdom, to another the message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, and to still another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same, the Spirit, and he gives them to each one just as he determines. The body is a unit, though it is made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jew or Greek, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Am I going out of order? I don't know. Our next reading is from the 7th chapter of John. On the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, streams of living water will flow from within. By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Up to that time the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. And then lastly, our reading for Pentecost comes from the 2nd chapter of the book of Acts. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came and rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard the sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard them speaking in his own language. Utterly amazed, they asked, Are not all these men who are speaking Galileans? then how is it that each of us hears them in his own native language? Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, "What does this mean?" Some, however, made fun of them and said, "They have had too much wine." Then Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice, and addressed the crowd. "Fellow Jews and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully. These men are not drunk as you suppose. It's only 9 a.m. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs of the earth below, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Let's pray. God, reveal yourself to us this morning, we ask. And God, I ask that your people here this morning feel the joy of knowing just how wonderful it is whenever your people are gathered. So God, even for a little while, help us to forget everything else going on. And to just know the wonder of what it is to be united by your Spirit. Amen.
I forgot your
Sorry, that wasn't subtle.
I forgot it. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Someone left a cup of water up here and I drank it.
No, I got that.
I thought
for
I was
you.
gonna say, I don't know, is that not mine?
No, I got that for you, and I turned the coffee pot on. I forgot to pour it.
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry.
I think it's yours.
I
It
hope
is.
so. I hope
It
so.
is. I got that for you. But
There's
I
no-
remembered you said you wanted both.
Well, okay, that's okay.
Do they now?
Since we have been apart for quite some time, I thought to myself as I was preparing for this morning, I haven't told you a story in a while. So now that we are finally back together, and praise God for that, I wanted to tell you all a new story, one that you haven't heard before. Now, I have said many times before that my family loves sports. I love them very much, but everything I love about them isn't from myself, it's from what my dad has taught me, because my dad loved them before I did, and he taught me to love them as well. So when Becky, my twin sister, and I were old enough to finally play sports, there was this kind of moment for my dad where it was like reigniting this love for them, because it wasn't any longer just watching some strangers play it on television. He got to see actual people play that he knew. He could be involved once again. And involved again is exactly what he became. Now, my dad was on every booster club that he could be on. He would fill in as referee if he needed to. And on some rare occasions, he would fill in as coach. And for all the love that my dad had for sports, he loves them all. My dad's absolute favorite sport was high school wrestling. Surprising. It's not too many people that love that the most. So whenever I started wrestling and he knew that, he was chomping at the bit for any way that he could help. He had coached for a long time before I was born. He used to coach at the Bronson House. And he really knew a lot about the sport, so he was really excited to finally give back now that he had his own son that would wrestle as well. So when I entered middle school, they asked him if he would help coach the Little League wrestling team. It would not be my team, but the team below us. Which to him was the greatest thing in the world. You could have asked him to have coached Penn State. That's what it was like to him. He loved it. And it's funny because I remember him saying all throughout my childhood, he beat this idea in our heads that good athletes start in these kind of feeder programs. If you want a good athlete that is in high school, then you need to start them young, get them in these Little League programs. So my dad was so excited to be involved again and to be able to help this program for the older kids. I remember after my practice in middle school, I went to my dad's practice for Little League one time, and he ran the thing as if it was some kind of military camp. These kids, even on day one, were expected to be disciplined and tough and respectful. And for the most part, they were. It was surprisingly how well these children, little kids, caught on. They did exactly what they were told. It was amazing. That is, except for one kid. On this team was a kid named Leo. Now, Leo didn't care one bit about wrestling. He could win or lose. He could care less. It wouldn't change one thing about him. What he did care about, though, was pretending that he was a dinosaur throughout practice. His mom told us that he does it at home, too. So as the other kids were running and things like that, you would see Liam bringing up the back, roaring and squawking and running goofy, and pretending to bite the other kids, which in hindsight probably made them run a little harder. This Leo kid, and I kid you not, did this every single day. Leo, if you're out there somewhere, I gotta know, you still doing it? So the consensus thought was, when our first match finally arrives, because you get to practice for about a month beforehand, and Leo goes out there for this match, this poor kid is going to get killed. So the team's first match rolls around, and I remember it distinctly because this match was at Beth Center, and the whole team looked pretty good. They were doing pretty well. Disciplined, tough, all those things that my dad had hoped they would be. And then Leo's match came up. Instead of stretching and warming up like most of the other athletes, Leo is off pretending to hatch himself from an egg under the stairs and running around like he normally does. And I remember this moment of genuine fear that this kid might actually get seriously hurt. So the match starts, and even though Leo looks surprisingly serious at the beginning, it goes exactly as expected. He gets destroyed, and it happens very, very quick. Now, at the end of wrestling matches, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, what happens is the two wrestlers shake hands, and the referee raises the hand of the wrestler who won. Now, Leo lost. He was not getting his hand raised, but as that referee raised that other kid's hand from Beth Center, something happened in the sport of wrestling that I still have to this day not seen. Leo let out the loudest squawk or roar, I don't know what kind of sound it was just very high-pitched, that I had ever heard. The entire gym at this point is now looking at this little boy who believes he is a dinosaur. My dad is appalled. He cannot take it. To this day, I have never seen anything like it or my dad react like that. And I've done some awful things as kids. So after the match, my dad pulls him aside and he just starts letting him have it. But the great thing about Leo is that this little kid he never once stopped smiling. He could care less. He could care less if his coach was mad, because at the end he hugged my dad and he kept doing his thing. He's a sweet kid. Now, as someone who knows a little bit about wrestling, I can confidently say that Leo had no real business being on that team, really. But the funny thing was, the other kids loved him. They loved Leo. He made them laugh, and when they would get tired because of the work and their spirits would get low, he would help raise their spirits, help them laugh. So to the other guys on the wrestling team, this Leo kid was kind of essential. And my goodness, did he enjoy wrestling. Or at least going. So maybe we didn't see it, but Leo deserved a place on that team as much as any other kid. This morning, being that it is Pentecost, it is kind of crazy to think back to what everything has been like during this quarantine, and how, when we are talking about reopening in churches in a whole, that a lot of people were kind of setting their aim dates for Pentecost for the 31st. But as time went on, it seemed like that was probably going to be a bit of a dream, of a stretch that probably isn't going to happen. But here we are on Pentecost on the 31st, as we celebrate the working of the Spirit in our lives. But more importantly, the uniting of his church back together. How awesome is that? Now, normally on Pentecost, we would focus on the reading from Acts this morning. And we will look at that. But first, we are going to look at a much different text, a much older, earlier text. This morning, we will begin by looking at our reading from the book of Numbers. Now, the book of Numbers, for those who are unfamiliar, is quite interesting. In the original Hebrew tradition, this book would have been titled something like In the Wilderness. But since this book is full of kind of numerical lists, we have these kind of censuses of the tribes of Israel, of sacrifices, of objects that Israel has accumulated. This Greek word numeri kind of gets associated with the book, so it changes to Numbers. And while Numbers do play a role in what's going on here, the overarching theme is wilderness. It is a telling of the story of Moses and the people of God wandering in the wilderness after they have been freed from the oppressive land of Egypt. It retells their story of journeying towards this land that God has promised to them. Now, in this story, the people of God, like so many times before, have not been particularly faithful. Even after being set free from Egypt, having this moment of Moses encountering God on Mount Sinai, and even after God providing food and direction for them. Before our reading this morning, just a few verses earlier, we see the people of God still complaining, still dissatisfied. In our reading from chapter 11, Israel is no longer happy with the manna that God has provided for them to eat. They want meat, they want seasonings and fruits. And I know what that's like because my grandma was a really bad cook. And this hunger and dissatisfaction leads them to say, well, why would you even bring us up out of Egypt if this is how miserable life is going to be? Now, this is not solely a story about the complaining of Israel. It is a part, but there is a second story happening right beside this one. Because in a few verses later, we see Moses doing the same thing. He is bringing this dissatisfaction before God, saying, why have you brought this trouble on me? Did I give birth to these people, Israel? Am I responsible for nursing them, for taking care of them? Isn't that your job, God, to take care of your people? And Moses wraps it up in a kind of similar fashion and says, if you're going to treat me like this, God, then why don't you just go ahead and kill me? When you look at it, it sounds just as kind of pouty as people complaining about what they didn't get to eat. Now, being that this is two stories intertwined together to make one, we have two separate endings. The people of Israel finally get their meat, and if you remember the story, they get very sick. This is the response to the complaining of the tribes of Israel. But in response to the complaining of Moses, God has this much more kind answer. Since Moses thinks it is unfair for him to take the brunt for caring for all these people, God says, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. I want you to gather 70 elders throughout the camps of Israel and meet in the tent of meeting. So that is what Moses does. He gathers these 70 elders, which are not exactly what we would expect as kind of church elders, but more so kind of like literal elders, like elder members in the community, and kind of respected people in the community. And they meet in this tent of meeting. Now, in this tent, something miraculous happens. This very same Spirit of God, who we don't usually expect to be a character in the story this early, although he is. The same Spirit that has connected Moses to God throughout his life is now being poured out onto these 70-something elders of Israel. The Spirit of God that leads Moses and helps him hear the voice of God is now being shared amongst these 70 elders. Even though this story is found in Numbers, it is very Pentecost-like. Because when this happens, these 70 elders of Israel immediately start prophesying. Same thing as we read in Acts. This burden of leading Israel by the Spirit of God is now shared among the people. Moses will remain as the front in this movement and guiding God's people, but he's no longer alone. These elders share in the task and will hopefully lead the people in the will of God. From here is when the story gets hairy. Now, this all sounds kind of Pentecostish, like I said, the Spirit being poured out on all these kind of deserving people of Israel, but the story doesn't end there. While these elders are in the tent of meeting with Moses, outside the camp, or in the camp outside the tent, there is a commotion. These two men who we really know nothing about, we don't know any of their backstory, are also prophesying. The same Spirit that fell on these elders in the tent has somehow fallen on them as well. Now, this does not go over very smoothly. This tent of meeting is kind of like a precursor to the temple. And there's already this kind of, I don't know if you'd like to call it superiority complex, but it's something like that. It is similar to the priests that we later see in the temple. Assuming that God is only revealed to those who are deserving, to those who are in the temple. That would be the priests. This is the same kind of mindset. These 70 elders were chosen. They were handpicked, elevated above the normal people of Israel. And the Spirit came down on them in this kind of prestigious meeting place. It's kind of cool to see this similarity between the practices of the temple and this tent. So it makes sense that feathers are a little rustled when these two men who didn't make it into the tent are somehow able to do exactly what these other 70 elders can do. So they say to Moses, "You have to stop this." But Moses' answer is something special. He says, Are you jealous for my sake? Are you jealous for me? Because I wish the Lord's people, all of them, were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on all of them. See, it doesn't matter whether or not these men are part of the 70 with the best resumes, the 70 of the handpicked. They don't make it into the tent of meeting. But somehow sitting with Moses doesn't matter. The very same Spirit of God that is poured out on Moses, that is poured out on these 70 elders from Israel, is somehow also poured out onto these two random men living in the camp as well. And they prophesy. And Moses' response is not, these men are doing things that they shouldn't. They aren't qualified. They don't deserve to know this Spirit. But his response is, my hope is that all of the people that belong to the Lord, all of his people, would know the power of the Spirit of God. This is the story of Pentecost. The Spirit of God has connected us to Jesus, who has ascended to be with the Father. The same Spirit is falling on people all over the place. It doesn't just stay in one room full of cooped up, scared disciples. But this power of the Spirit extends to people all over, all around them. People, if you will, from outside of the tent. This Spirit connects us to something bigger than ourselves, and it transcends even the biggest of barriers that we could set between ourselves. I cannot think of a time in my life when tensions in the world have been higher, where the boiling point is so close. Granted, I am only 28 years old. You guys, someone older than me may have an example, but I sure as heck can't think of one. Somehow in the middle of people dying, this COVID-19 thing has torn the healthy people apart. Somehow a person of color is killed by police because we still think it's okay in a lot of instances for people of color to be outside the tent. Our cities are burning and businesses are destroyed because people are angry. Now that is not to say, please don't misunderstand me here, that there are not different pieces of facts surrounding things like COVID-19 and the riots we see in our cities. I am not saying that. I am saying, however, as someone who believes that they have been called to preach this wonderful message of Jesus, that there are certain things that I cannot ignore. As people who follow Jesus, there are things that we cannot ignore. And one of those things is the belief that there are some people who are worthy while others are not. You can't ignore that. We have this idea presented in Numbers ingrained in who we are. As if because someone is outside of what we expect to be worthy, that God cannot possibly authentically be working in them. Because we think someone is outside of this tent of the prestigious, they have no business knowing this Spirit of God. How sad of an idea. You cannot celebrate Pentecost with preaching a different message. You can wear all the red that you like or not. You can put new banners in the church. But unless you celebrate and find joy, great joy, because the Spirit of God is poured out on all people of all backgrounds, that the story is bigger than you and me, then you missed the point somewhere along the line. The celebration isn't in flaming tongues. It isn't in disciples no longer in fear. It isn't in new banners. It isn't in our doors being open once again. The celebration is in the fact that even though Jesus has lived and has died, is somehow alive again. And he is still with us because of this work of the Spirit. And he still calls us and he leads us, all of us, together. It is a dangerous idea to assume that someone else has no place on the team. Even when it doesn't look like what we think it should, it still has a place, because even when people don't look like we should, we have a place. When we aren't what we should be, we have a place. The team needs people like Leo, just like it needs people like me or my dad. So this Pentecost, and now that our doors are open again, may we welcome people in them. And may we be like the believers that Jesus says in the book of John that we read, whose hearts flow like rivers of living water. Welcome back, everyone. Let's get to work. Amen. Now, if you will, please join me in singing our last hymn, hymn 573.
Amen.
you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon